It was late one Friday night, and Molly Rutter was sitting at home waiting for her husband to come back from the pub. Every Friday night, he went out to the Wrekin Inn for one little drink, and then didn't come back for hours and hours, and she was sitting there waiting for him. And sure enough, she heard him stumbling about trying to find the right house, the familiar thud as he fell over the rake in the garden. And then he came through the door. She scowled at him and said, "Jonas, why do you do this to me? You're always out late at night. You spend all your paycheck on drinking. I want a new dress. I want to be able to actually have some nice food. You spend it all on drinking." And Jonas swayed backwards and forwards, wondering why there were two Marys shouting at him, and said, And she carried on. She went on and on at him and then said, "What do you have to say for yourself?" "I love you." That didn't really cut the ice, and Mary carried on and on and on, but eventually she exhausted herself. And once she'd done that, she said, "Fine, do you want me to go get you one last glass of ale before you go to bed?" And Jonas said yes, and so she went into the pantry, and there she saw the bottle of ale. And next to the bottle was a smaller one that she hadn't seen before, and she reached out for it and saw it was the rat poison. She'd talked to Jonas about this before. You don't leave the rat poison next to the ale in case someone mistakes. And then an idea struck her. Wouldn't it be crazy if she just accidentally happens to put some poison in the ale? That would happen, you know, it would be an accident. But she knew this was a really stupid thing to do, but she was so angry at him for always staying up late at night, and she thought of not having to wait up for him, not having him come home drunk. And she made her decision, and she came out with the ale in a cup, and she gave it to Jonas. And Jonas downed it, and he said, "Oh, I think it's a bit bitter, I think it's gone off." And Molly smiled at him and said, "I'm going up to bed." And she went up to bed, and she lay down, and she tried to sleep, but her heart was racing as she was listening out to see what happened. Then she heard Jonas coughing. He started calling, "Mary! Mary, help me!" And Mary lay in bed, and she waited until there was silence, and then went to sleep. And she woke up in the morning, and she came downstairs, and she was in that kind of half-asleep state where I am most of the mornings, where you don't really know what's going on, you're not quite awake. And she came downstairs, and she saw Jonas passed out on the floor again. And then she remembered. And she looked down, and she bent down to him. She saw he wasn't breathing, and she put her hand against his chest, but his heart wasn't beating, and she knew then that she'd done it. She'd murdered her husband, and she didn't feel guilty or sad. She just felt free. She could do anything she liked now. She could go and spend money on what she wanted, and she could probably get a widow's pension. And then she remembered that if anyone found out that she'd murdered her husband, she wouldn't be very free at all. She'd be in prison or hung. And so she realised she needed to do something. And she thought and she thought and she thought, and then she had an idea. And she went out to her garden. And Mary had a lovely kitchen garden where she grew all sorts of vegetables. And she went and she got the big wheelbarrow that she used to take the vegetables to market. And she pulled it back into the house, and she heaved Jonas up and she put him into the wheelbarrow. And she decided to go and get some vegetables to cover up his body. Now, who can think of any vegetables that are good for covering up a dead body? I'm sure if you
Cabbages.
Cabbages. She went and she got some cabbages and she put them in and she covered it up. Any more?
Leeks.
Leeks, yeah. She got some cabbages and some leeks and some onions, yeah, to hide the smell. And she covered his body completely up in vegetables. And then she went strolling along to market. But when she got to the turning of the Arkle, she turned up the hill and she pushed that wheelbarrow up and up and up the hill until she reached the Dary Pit. And then she pulled all the vegetables off Jonas's body, and she picked up stones and she filled his pockets with stones. And she picked up his body and tipped it into the Dary Pit, and it sunk beneath the black waters. And he was gone, and she was safe. And she took all the vegetables and she put them back in her wheelbarrow, and she went off to market to sell them, because there's no point letting them go to waste. And so she was free. She was a single woman at last, and she went and she bought herself a new dress. It was beautiful, and it had a tailored bodice and big flowing skirts, and she walked back home and she did all the housework and knew that he wouldn't come back to mess up the house. And then she went up to bed. While she was asleep, she had a dream. She had a dream that she was by the Dary Pit, and his body was floating at the top, and all her neighbours were there, and they were staring at her and saying, "Murderer." And she jerked awake, and she realised she needed to go check and make sure that his body had sunk down after all. And she pulled back on the nice new dress she had worn, and she ran. She ran all the way to the Arkle. And of course, this was the middle of the night, and it's a strange enough place when it's in the day, but when it's at night, with the moon shining through and long shadows from all the trees, it's a pretty strange place. As she looked, she could see there was nothing floating on the water. She breathed a sigh of relief. Then she heard something. She was sure she heard someone go, "Mary." And she listened again. She surely couldn't have heard it, but then it was again, louder. "Mary!" She thought maybe it was one of her neighbours who'd seen her. She looked around, heard it again, "Mary!" And she decided she needed to leave, and she went to run. And there, in front of her, was the body of her husband. There was Jonas, dripping with water, his head lolling to the side, his lips still blue from the poison. He looked at her and he said, "Mary!" And she was shocked, and she started stumbling backwards, and she stumbled until she fell into the pit. And the cold shocked her, and the thick mud pulled her down, and it weighed down her skirts of her beautiful dress, and she was pulled under the water. And that was the end of Mary. And that's almost the end of the story, except to say, if you come back on a Saturday night, if you come back tonight even, and you just listen, you might hear a voice saying, "Mary."